I mean, honestly, like there's been no bigger roller coaster this in the last year in any award market than what's happening in NFL Most Valuable Player right now. Where and like I see a lot of people today have like really strong takes on who they'd bet, and we can talk about it as we go. And my take last week was kind of like, look, like it's pretty straightforward what's going to happen. I was like, your chaos result is the Ravens win and Purdy plays really bad. Like that's your chaos result. It's not going to happen a lot, but when it does, chaos is what you get. And like not only did they lose, I mean, it's literally we used crafted in a lab to use like, we use that with bad beats sometimes, like as in like it's not just a bad beat, it was crafted in a lab to be the worst possible bad beat, like designed to give you maximum pain as you're experiencing it. I mean, imagine you bet Brock Purdy to win Most Valuable Player 2 months ago or something, 50-1 at the start of the season, something like that. And he gets to minus 250. I still feel this way, that if they had won that game and beaten the Ravens, he would have just won and it would have been over and that would have been it. And your chaos result was the Ravens winning. But imagine you're watching the game. I mean, he's minus 250. The Niners are a big favorite to win that game on Christmas night. And we were driving to my in-laws from her aunt and uncle's, so it's like a 20-minute drive. When the game started, we stayed until the Eagles-Giants game ended, which ended up being really competitive. And so we're in the car, and I'm like, play-by-play on my phone, whatever. I'm like, Purdy intercepted in the end zone. I go, well, that's not really a good start. I guess he drove him all the way down the field. Like that's not great. And then it snowballs into, I don't remember a game that swung an award race as dramatically as that game did, where it's not like, oh, his chances took a big hit. No, like the earth was salted so nothing else could grow. Like that's like how bad it was. 4 interceptions. And then the cherry on top is Darnold comes in and looks amazing, which feeds the narrative that Purdy's a system quarterback. I mean, you couldn't design it like any worse for that type of bet. So to have just the price go from minus 250 to now, like I think a lot of people feel like he has a 0% chance. He was minus 250 to 0 in a game. They still play 17 of them. Like that's outrageous. And I'm not even saying I disagree. Like I do think that's how people have perceived this, the way this is played out. So just that result specifically, and we'll get more into it as we go, the Ravens and what's going on with them, and can they win the Super Bowl? The Niners, like what is that for them? Is that just kind of a blip and Purdy throws 4 picks, or what is it? But just like the rapid shift in MVP odds, and you could be like, oh, I told you it was Lamar Jackson. Be like, man, then you better have the biggest ticket for the Ravens money line on Monday night. Like, great, because then you get paid. Like if you bet Lamar, you got that result, and there's still a chance you may not win. Like there's no victory laps right now, like at all. You're you're the favorite, but guess who was the favorite last week? And look what happened. Like man, like you've been better off just betting the game. But chaos is what we've got in that race. And we'll talk about, is there a betting opportunity or not? I think a lot of people have a strong opinion on it, but we definitely have chaos in that market, and it turned as sharply and as quickly as I think I've seen anything turn in like my history of betting these award markets.
And it felt like, Ken, like Monday night, Christmas night was like an old school like betting night on Twitter in a bad way, where everyone was like, told you. Right. Or like if I told you that if the Ravens won, this would wow, what an expert. What a genius.
Prediction. Ravens won and Lamar goes to favorite. Who could have predicted that? Just Earth.
It's just
Earth could have predicted it.
Dude, it was
and
like
he still may not win. Rob, this is a 2-part question here. Just we haven't talked about league MVP that much in the first hour. We'll do a lot of it tomorrow when we do this game. When we do a couple other games, we'll talk about it as well. So Brock Purdy obviously puts up the clunker on Christmas night. 4 picks. Darnold comes in and it's again crafted in a lab to make him the most likely to lose the award as possible. So just a 2-part answer here. This does not have to be a price discussion where Lamar is like minus 200. He's kind of taken the torch from Brock Purdy as a presumptive favorite to win the MVP. If the Ravens beat Miami, who do you think wins MVP? And if the Dolphins beat Baltimore, who do you think wins MVP? And it can be the same. It could be Lamar for both. You don't have to give me a different player. But if you play out Baltimore, Miami both ways, just knowing that result, what would be your best guess who wins MVP in each situation?
Yeah, so this is when there's a cluster like this and there's so many people that can win at this point in the season, I'll start to call it the recency bias award, right? Like Purdy has no chance now because we're just going to remember this type of game. If Lamar wins this week, his number is going to, I mean, I don't want to say he's a shoo-in because anything can happen, but I think it's very likely that he's going to end up winning. Now, if they lose, okay, Tua's going to get a bump, but then the Dolphins play the Bills afterwards, and that outcome of that game could also have an impact on MVP as well. So it's kind of like a wait and see type of approach. My only opinion is I don't think Christian McCaffrey is live, personally. This is not just because I don't think a running back deserves to win. I just believe that the general consensus out there from people who can vote now, they diminish the position enough that I think it hurts his chances at winning MVP overall. So that's my only kind of statement on this market right now. I do, though, think Tua is very live. I mean, if you do like the Dolphins this week, you might as well bet Tua at 9-1 as well. I think that's certainly in play, especially when you just look at the like his numbers this year are very, very good relative to Lamar's as well. So I think that he certainly has a shot.
If Miami beats Baltimore, presumably Jalen Waddle hasn't been ruled out yet. I mean, it's a high ankle sprain. Like, I can't imagine he's going to play in this game. He might not play the rest of the season. We'll see. If Miami beats Baltimore on Sunday and then beats Buffalo in Week 18 in their quest to be the number one in home field advantage in the AFC playoffs, like, does Tua win if Miami wins the next two games?
I think that there's it depends upon how he looks, of course. Like, I think, like, we had a situation last year where it was the game, it was like December, I believe, 11th or 12th, like that week, where Kansas City won, but Patrick Mahomes threw 3 interceptions, and he went from being the favorite in the markets to an underdog behind Jalen Hurts. So there is precedent, and I'm guessing there's a million more. That's just the one I remember. But there's precedent for a player winning the games, but not getting closer. In fact, losing ground as MVP, because the quarterback position kind of is the highlight, of everything. And so if he wins but plays poorly, I don't think he's the MVP. If he lights the world on fire and beating the Ravens and the Bills, I do think that he will win MVP. So I think that that's like kind of the distinction between Tua. Like, I don't think it's just win 2 games for the Dolphins and he's MVP. I think it's how he plays will influence it as well.
Eric, I'm curious, the next question, we talked about basically everybody in the MVP. You even mentioned Dak there very briefly. And I'll just say, like, I think I agree with basically everything that you've said so far. And I think it's like the most likely way it plays out is the way you've laid it out. Just for people who are kind of like saying to themselves, well, wait a minute. And I know he was just awful on Monday night. I mean, absolutely brutal. Like, there's a chance Brock Purdy is still the leading passer in the league in like all categories at the end of the year. They close with Washington and the Rams. Like, it's a lot easier than the last couple weeks from an opponent standpoint. I'm just playing devil's advocate here. Like, I don't think Purdy will win necessarily, but he went from -250 to 12-1, and there are still 2 games to go. Is he a 0 in terms of ability to win this? Because you've kind of, like, you haven't mentioned his name so far, and you've laid out a lot of permutations. Is there a way Brock Purdy actually gets back into this?
I think if everybody else falls on their face, including Josh Allen, then I think so. I think the hardest part is all of the outs for Purdy involve Lamar, Tua, and Josh Allen living under expectation, which I don't think all 3 of those things can happen at once. I think if Tua plays poorly, then it opens the door for Josh Allen. I think if Lamar plays poorly, it opens the door for Tua or Josh Allen, depending upon who actually wins the outcome between the Bills and the Ravens and the Dolphins. So my issue with Purdy is, like, there are these like correlated outcomes that, if they were uncorrelated and they were all to go 0 for 3 over the next two weeks, then it opens the door. I just don't see how, we get a matchup with Tua Tagovailoa in 2 straight games where both quarterbacks play poorly, because that's ultimately what has to happen, I think, for Purdy to get back into it. There's also the part, and like, I don't necessarily agree with this as much. It's sort of like they all view Purdy as like the poor man's Matt Ryan. And I don't necessarily agree with that. I think if Purdy, lights the world on fire from an EPA or yards per attempt or passing perspective, and they were the 1 seed and no one else was even close, like if no one else was worthy of the award, I think you give it to Purdy. I don't know if that many voters think that way, though. And I think, and obviously that's what matters. I think a lot of people, for lack of a better term, are offended by Brock Purdy's, production relative to our perception of him as a player.
It's the first time it has to be in like over a decade. I made 0 championship games. All my semifinal matchups, I got bounced.
all the championship games are coming up this weekend, right? That's always when
now,
the
like
championship
there are
is.
some leagues that will do like the week 18, which is just like you have to be a real psycho, like a real sicko to have fantasy football in week 18. But here's Jarrett Stidham throwing passes to Marvin Mims in week 18. Like that might be your winning stack in all seriousness coming up in week
Marvin
18.
Mims.
I had a league where, and like think about this, and Ken, you don't have to be a fantasy football player to understand the ludicrousness of this. I lost a matchup where I had Amari Cooper as one of my receivers.
Oh, no.
I lost. Oh yeah,
And that's like
with Amari
the
Cooper.
game of his life, right? Yeah, that was. I mean, that's about as good as that gets. Had to be due to who was the culprit. Like, why did you end up losing it if you had Amari Cooper? Was there one specific culprit?
I faced Brees Hall in a couple of matchups where if you faced him in PPR, like you got avalanched. You got absolutely annihilated. CeeDee Lamb was on that particular team that I lost to. Like I scored 1 billion points and my opponent scored like 1 billion. It was just one of those things. And like, I find myself now, and I had gotten eliminated from my home league, my favorite league, the week before. So I had this weekend was sweat free in the league that I sweat the most. Gotta tell you, I enjoy it. It's just one of those things, man. It's like I'm a masochist, I guess, right?
Sure.
I enjoy my Sundays more without this part of it, without this component. But I'll be back next year. Like, thank you, sir. May I have another? So yeah, to all the fantasy players out there, I am title-less. Not only am I title-less this season, I will not even play for a fantasy football title this season. So much for Nick Costos, fantasy expert. What a loser.